Welcome to Canard Community Church on this Christmas Eve or this Christmas Day or whenever you find yourself watching this. My name is John. I'm one of the leaders here at the church. And normally on Christmas Eve we would begin to fill this place with people. There would be people who would come here who have never been here before, and people who had traveled from a long distance to visit family and felt the need to walk into a church. There are others who gather here all the time, and we would engage in these rituals of singing and lighting candles and listening to an old story. This isn't an ordinary Christmas, is it? You're watching this from an electronic device somewhere that isn't a church building, likely. That doesn't mean the story loses its meaning. In fact, it might be even more relevant now than ever. So we're going to begin by centering and settling ourselves. First, you're going to hear O Holy Night, sung by Alora. And while you hear her sing, you're going to see pictures done by Canadian artist William Karelic, who imagines what this story might look like in all sorts of different times and places. And after that's done, 3 minutes of silence. I'll just sit here. Maybe you can sit with me wherever you are. And let the busyness of the Christmas preparations settle out. And imagine what it'd be like to hear this story again in our time and place.
The stars are brightly shining. It is the night of the dear Savior's birth. Long lay the world in sin and error pining, till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. A thrill of hope, the weary world rejoices, for yonder breaks a new and glorious morn. Fall on your knees. Oh, hear the angel voices. Oh, night divine. Oh, night when Christ was born. Oh, night divine. Oh, night when Christ was born. Led by the light of faith serenely beaming, with glowing hearts by his cradle we stand. So led by the light of the stars sweetly gleaming, here come the wise men from the Orient land. The King of Kings lay thus in lowly manger, in all our trust, born to be our friend. Fall on your knees.
May our hearts and minds and spirits be open to the great mystery that is the Christmas story. We're going to hear the story now. This beautiful old story. And you might be thinking to yourself, oh, this story, it's just some made-up tale. But you're probably right. But there's truth in it, and there's beauty in it that I think would be a shame to lose. So we're going to hear this story and reflect on it as we go. Here's Debbie reading from Luke chapter 2.
At that time, Emperor Augustus ordered a census to be taken throughout the Roman Empire. When this first census took place, Quirinius was the governor of Syria. Everyone then went to register himself, each to his own hometown. Joseph went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to the town of Bethlehem in Judea, the birthplace of King David. Joseph went there because he was a descendant of David. He went to register with Mary, who was promised in marriage to him. She was pregnant, and while they were in Bethlehem, the time came for her to have her baby. She gave birth to her first son, wrapped him in cloths, and laid him in a manger. There was no room for them to stay in the inn.
A couple years ago, when we could meet in person without fear of COVID, we did this hands-on nativity here in the church. And we built out these little scenes with little figurines. And when we got to the part where Jesus is born and he's laid in a manger, we had this kind of starry mountain backdrop of the city with a whole bunch of hay, and all the kids got to put animals on. And there's the typical like chicken and cow, but then there's also like lions and tigers and horses, and we just filled this thing up with all sorts of different animals. Because when we think about Jesus and we hear the story, he's laid in a manger, we think, yeah, Jesus was born in a barn. And everywhere we look around, there's depictions of Jesus being born in a barn. But what if we've got that part of the story kind of backwards? Well, there are some scholars, much smarter than I will ever be, who have been looking at this story, unpacking this story, and realizing that maybe the author actually had a bit of a different intention when they were telling this story. You see, when we hear the story, we hear that there was no room for them in the inn. And when we think of the word inn, we think of like a motel or a hotel. Like they pulled up to a Ramada, or they pulled up to a Motel 8, and there was no room, and they pulled up to the next one, and there was no room. But in the story, the original word, which is in Greek, is kataluma. And that word may actually not mean hotel or motel or inn, as we typically think, but it might mean something else. It might actually mean guest room. You see, the typical Palestinian home had 2 rooms in it. This is a far cry from 6-bedroom houses. It had 2 rooms in it. It had a guest room and the main room. The main room is where the family slept. The guest room was for guests. And in the story reads that the people had to come from all over the place to Bethlehem, because this was the hometown of one of the great lineages of Israel. So people came from all over the place to this town to register. And so families who lived in Bethlehem stayed in the main room, and then the guest room would fill up with guests. And you can imagine, if you have enough people in a town who are all somehow related, all the guest rooms fill up. All the guest rooms are full. All the katalumas are full. There is no room anywhere. But this is first century Palestinian times. And there are no Motel 8s to check in. There might be the odd inn, but they are not big business like we have today. And so Mary and Joseph would have knocked on doors looking for a distant relative. And the kataluma, the guest room was full. But no matter how distant the relative, if you had a relative in town who needed a place to stay, you would do anything to give them a place to stay. And so were Mary and Joseph looking for a place to stay? What if they were invited into the main room of the house? There was no room in the guest room, but there was a little bit in the main room. They could carve out a corner for them to stay. But now you might be thinking, well, what about the mangers? Well, you see, in most houses, the main room had two little hollows where they could actually feed the animals from. And so the animals were just outside in almost like a mud room, and they could actually feed the animals from the main house in little mangers. And you can imagine that this main room, which might have a couple of parents and lots of kids, was full and cramped already, and you add two strangers, two distant relatives to this mix. Where else do you put the baby? The table's full, the chairs are full. You put it in the coziest spot. You lie it in a manger. So what if Jesus wasn't born in a barn? What if Jesus was born in the main room of the house, in the living room or the dining room? Do you see why I think this story might be relevant to COVID times? Because here you are watching this from your house. Yeah, I definitely think Jesus can be found in a church. But in story, it's just as likely that he's found in somebody's living room somewhere. In the kitchen, with the family. Yeah, a little cramped, a little squished, a little uncomfortable. But there, light is born. How beautiful is that? Let's hear some more of the story.
There were some shepherds in that part of the country who were spending the night in the fields, taking care of their flocks. An angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone over them. They were terribly afraid, but the angel said to them, "Don't be afraid. I am here with good news for you, which will bring great joy to all the people. This very day in David's town your Savior was born, Christ the Lord, and this is what will prove it to you. You will find a baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger." Suddenly a great company of heaven's angels appeared with the angel, singing praises to God. "Glory to God in the highest heaven, and peace on earth to those with whom he is pleased." When the angels went away from them back to heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let's go to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has told us." So they hurried off and found Mary and Joseph and saw the baby lying in the manger. When the shepherds saw him, they told them what the angel had said about the child. All who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds said. Mary remembered all these things and thought deeply about them. The shepherds went back, singing praises to God for all they had heard and seen. It had been just as the angel had told them.
A number of years ago, I was working in British Columbia, and Lauren and I were away a long way from home. And so we decided that we were going to return home after Christmas Eve as quickly as we could. And it happened that there was a flight that was leaving out of Victoria just late enough that I would be all done my Christmas Eve services at the church I was working at, and we could get to the airport with enough time. So after church was done, we got in the car, we took the drive and we got to the airport, and it was packed. Like, clearly everyone had the same idea. Get on a flight and go home. And so the airport, which is a good distance from the city, had zero parking. Every parking spot was full. And so somebody, maybe in anticipation of this, had said, well, you know what, we've got that abandoned field just down the road that people can park at. And so when you got to the airport, you were directed down this dirt pathway in your car. And it was so strange because it didn't feel like an airport parking lot at all. You know, there was no lights, there was no pavement, there was no markings. And the person who was directing us said, oh, there'll be somebody out there to direct you when you get there. So we pull out and it's all dark and we see all these cars, and then emerge these two teenagers. In my mind, they have those airport wands, but I don't even think that was true. Maybe some high-vis vests. And they were directing these cars that were rolling in. They're showing us where to park and how to get to the airport. And I remember looking at these two teens and thinking, you're just like the shepherds. Like the shepherds in the story, they're out tending their flocks. They're out doing what shepherds do, watching the sheep, making sure that in the middle of the night, when the predators want to take advantage, that no one will come. They probably were working as teams, making sure everyone's sheep were okay, but these are bottom of the ladder type people. And yet when the baby is born, the story talks about angels. And the invitation is for them to go see the baby. It's such a beautiful image. It's not some news crew that goes to see the baby first. It's not the mayor of the town. It's not the king. It's not the people with the most money. It's a bunch of shepherds in the middle of the nowhere watching their animals. Like, this story is just not some abstract story for a few people. Like, this story could be for most people. For people who are grinding it out, working their hardest, trying to find meaning and beauty in the world. And they are invited to see the light, as we are all invited to see the light. May you see the light. May you be invited into this beautiful story. May you be invited to go see that baby in the living room. One of the ways that we celebrate and recognize the coming of the light of Christ is by lighting a candle that we light here on Christmas Eve, and that we light every service until we begin Advent again next year, a way of symbolizing the light coming into the world. And so Grace and Alora, Landon and Daniel are going to light our candles for us.
We light the candle of hope. Hope in the promises of God, hope in the power of the Spirit, hope in the person of Jesus, hope in each of us, and hope in all of us.
We light a candle of peace. Peace as we trust the great mystery, peace as we follow Jesus' path, peace within our hearts, and peace throughout our world.
We light a candle of joy, joy deep within us and our communities in times of happiness and sorrow. We light a candle of love, love within us and among us and beyond us.
We light the Christ candle. Jesus illuminates the holy, the path of hope, peace, joy, and love.
May the Christ, may the light be born into your living room. May it be born into your heart, to your family, into your relationships, into our communities, and into this world. And not just today, not just on this Christmas Eve, this Christmas day, but the day after, and the day after, and the day after. Merry Christmas.